From previous lectures, we already learned that if you have a conductor like this piece of wire, conducting wire, and current flows through this wire, for example, in this direction, this current produces a magnetic field along the vicinity of this wire. So basically, the intrinsic source of magnetic field is just a moving charge, and this moving charge flows through the space-time continuum and creates a disturbance, and this disturbance is called magnetic field. Now, if we have a current loop like this one with an arbitrary shape, so notice that if you have a current loop that, for example, it has a current that flows this way, we could describe this current loop in terms of the current, and since it's a loop, it encloses a particular area, so it actually has a measurable area. And to collectively describe this current and area, we have this notion of magnetic dipole moment, mu, and mu is equal to current times the area of the loop. If we have, let's say, a perfectly circular current loop like this, and for example, current flows in this manner, so using the second right-hand rule, it produces a magnetic field that somewhat looks like this. But how about if we have a permanent magnet? Recall that a permanent magnet can produce its own magnetic field. So how can a permanent magnet produce its own magnetic field? Well, in fact, it's not connected to an EMF source to drive its charges inside the material and so on. So it turns out that permanent magnets consist of many molecular tiny current loops. And when you apply an external magnetic field to a permanent magnet, some of the disoriented current loops align with the external magnetic field, so that when you remove the external magnetic field, they remain aligned with each other and hence strengthening the magnitude of the magnetic field. So in this lecture, let's investigate the tiniest possible current loop. So I'm talking about a simple electron that is revolving in a perfectly circular manner. Let's assume that this electron moves in a perfectly circular manner and this is the center of its path. Let's assume that this electron maintains its circular orbit and it is at a radius r from the center. So let's denote that this electron has a mass m. Let's represent the electron mass with the variable m and its charge as E. By convention, it's negative E, but later we will just focus on its magnitude, which is just E. So again, let's assume that it is in a uniform circular motion, and as you recall from your mechanics class, when any object is undergoing a uniform circular motion, then the magnitude of its speed, v, is equal to 2 pi r divided by a fixed period. Since we have a current loop, we could actually represent this in terms of magnetic dipole moment. And the general definition of magnetic dipole moment is current times area. Based on this diagram, recall that the general definition of current is charge per unit time. And since the charge of the singular electron here is E, the magnitude of the charge of the electron is E, and we symbolize the one complete period with capital T. And we could just write current in terms of velocity and radius because later we need these two variables to replace mu in terms of another helpful variable. I'm going to use this relationship to write current in terms of velocity and the radius. I'm going to rewrite this in terms of T equals 2 pi r over V, then plug it here. So I'll end up with E V over 2 pi r. So I now have an expression for current. Next, apparently based on this setup, area is just equal to pi r squared. So if I'm going to plug this current and area to my definition of magnetic dipole moment, I'll end up with EV over 2 pi r times area, which is pi r squared. So based on this, pi cancels out and r squared becomes r and r becomes 1. So the final expression is EV r over 2. From your classical mechanics class, recall that any rotating object can be described or conveniently described by a single variable called angular momentum. Apparently, when you have a lot of tiny current loops, it is more practical to describe it in terms of angular momentum. So we would like to write magnetic dipole moment in terms of angular momentum. So recall that the definition of angular momentum is the vector L is equal to R cross P, or the linear momentum. And if you have a perfectly circular path, this cross product actually becomes a sine theta, and when you have a perfectly circular path, you'll have sine 90 degrees. So its magnitude, if you have a perfectly circular path just like our system, we assume that our electron moves in a perfectly circular path for simplicity. So I'll end up with R, which is this one, and then the definition of linear momentum, which is mv. So apparently this magnitude must have sine something, and again I emphasize that we have a perfectly circular path, so basically this is sine 90 degrees, so it's equal to 1. I'm not going to write it here. I can now readily write magnetic dipole moment in terms of L, since it has a variable v and r, and my L here has a variable r and v. So I can rewrite this as VR equals L over M and then plug it here. The magnetic dipole moment in terms of angular momentum is equal to E over 2M times L. Now, based on experiments, the atomic angular momentum L is actually quantized, meaning to say it is an integer multiple of something. For example, my n here means it is restricted to n equals 1, 2, 3, and so on. My n represents integer multiples. It turns out that L is an integer multiple of h bar, and h bar is actually equal to h over 2 pi. Here, h represents this what we call Planck's constant, 6.626 times 10 to the negative 34 joule second. Now, this Planck's constant is experimentally determined. Now, if I'm going to plug this result back to our magnetic dipole moment, notice that I can actually calculate a numerical value for the lowest possible energy. Based on this expression, the lowest possible energy a rotating charge can have is when n equals 1, so L equals h bar. So if I plug the lowest possible energy that a rotating charge can have, which is h bar, notice that everything here is basically a constant. E, recall that from my chapter 1, E is the lowest possible charge in our universe. It's actually 1.6 times 10 raised to negative 19 coulomb. And M, the mass of electron, is 9.11 times 10 raised to negative 31 kilogram. H is this. So everything here has a numerical value. So I can actually calculate the lowest possible magnetic dipole moment an electron can have. And it's equal to 9.274 times 10 to the negative 24 joule per Tesla. And this quantity has a special name, and this is actually called the Bohr Magneton. Imagine we have this mysterious object or material. Initially, it has a zero magnetic field. But when an object or a material has a zero magnetic field, it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't contain current loops. For example, this object can have many tiny current loops, and these current loops are just randomly oriented in such a way their net or total magnetic dipole moment is equal to 0. However, when you apply an external magnetic field through this object, so recall that this current loops has a tendency to realign their magnetic dipole moment parallel to the external magnetic field. So after removing the external magnetic field, some of the current loops are now aligned with respect to the external magnetic field, and hence this object gains a net magnetic field on its own. At this point, this object now has a measurable overall or total magnetic dipole moment. Now, if we divide this total magnetic dipole moment with the volume of the object, this quantity is called magnetization, represented by capital M. Now, based on experiments, the magnitude of magnetization is directly proportional to the applied external magnetic field. Now, apparently, for this relationship to become an equal sign, we multiply magnetic field with a constant, and this constant is represented by small Greek letter chi, and we put M here to denote that it has something to do with magnetization. Now, chi sub M is a constant with a special name, and it is actually called magnetic susceptibility. There are materials that has a positive magnetic susceptibility, and they are called paramagnetic materials. Also, recall the constant mu sub 0 or the permeability in free space. Now, notice that this permeability of free space or this constant works when your magnetic field is passing through a vacuum. Now, apparently, inside this object, you now have contributions coming from these tiny current loops. After going this process of removing the external field, it turns out that the overall magnetic field inside the material increases by a dimensionless factor called relative permeability. Let's denote such constant with K sub m. Now, in magnetic field calculations, when you have a paramagnetic material, you will now consider a new value for permeability, and permeability now increases by a factor of K sub m relative to the permeability of free space. Now, the constant relative permeability K sub m and the magnetic susceptibility is related by a relationship, and this is shown by the relationship K sub m equals K sub m minus 1. Magnetic susceptibility is also a measure by which relative permeability differs from unity. A paramagnetic material is a material that has magnetic susceptibility that is positive. Now, there's another classical relationship that proves the dependence of paramagnetic materials with temperature. So apparently, if you have a very hot object, even if you apply a strong external magnetic field to this object and you remove that external field, sometimes it will not possess a very strong intrinsic magnetic field because of the random motion of the molecule. So somehow, thermal motion or the vibration of molecules agitates or disrupt the orientations of this current loop. So it turns out that magnetization is dependent on temperature. And this dependence is shown by, so again, M is directly proportional to the external magnetic field, but this time, it has a dependency with temperature. So the greater the temperature for a fixed external magnetic field, the object will yield a small magnetization. So this C is called Curie constant, and this relationship is called Curie's law. Now, there is this class of paramagnetic materials called ferromagnetic materials like iron, cobalt, and nickel that contains large regions of magnetic domain. So, for example, this is the object. So, if you have a ferromagnetic material, they contain regions that possess uniform magnetization. So you can picture these tiny arrows as magnetic dipole moments. And apparently, when you apply an external magnetic field, majority of these disoriented magnetic dipole moments or magnetic domains are suddenly aligned, or majority of them are aligned to each other, so that when you remove the external magnetic field, this object possesses strong magnetic field. So this is why this is usually the materials used in creating permanent magnets. And also, recall that paramagnetic materials have positive magnetic susceptibility. Now, ferromagnetic materials also have positive magnetic susceptibility, but this time, they have a very large value of magnetic susceptibility compared to a paramagnetic material like aluminum. Now, we have another class of magnetic materials wherein when you apply an external magnetic field, Aside from the existing current loops, this material now produces new current loops that obeys Faraday's law of induction. Faraday's law implies that these new current loops will produce a magnetic field that opposes the external magnetic field. So apparently, somehow, diamagnetic materials repels external magnetic field. That's why they are magnetic materials with negative magnetic susceptibility. So example of such materials include diamond, lead, copper, etc. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and hit the notification bell button for awesome updates. Thank you for watching!